Okay, so this video is just sort of an example to help us work through how I would calculate GDP using this expenditure approach that we went through in a previous video. So in that approach, my GDP is calculated by adding up all the components of expenditures, which would be consumption plus investment plus government spending plus any net exports. So really, as long as I know that equation, this problem is relatively simple. So here I've given a bunch of categories of my expenditures, and I really just have to add them all up, right? So one little trick is we have to calculate net exports, which are my exports minus my imports. That's minus 10,000, right? So this is going to be a negative over here, my net exports. We're importing more than we export. So notice several ways I could refer to this. The trade balance is negative, which would mean then that we have a trade deficit. Which is a trade deficit of 10,000, right? So the deficit part tells me that it's negative. So I don't really need the negative, right? The trade balance is minus 10,000, which amounts to a trade deficit of 10,000. If it was positive, the trade surplus would be 10,000, right? Okay, so then all I have to do is just add all this up, right? So my GDP is my consumption, 200,000, plus my investment of 50,000, plus my government expenditures of 75. So we've got 325,000 right there, minus, because it's negative, my net exports of 10,000. So that was 325 minus 10, 315,000 is my GDP. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So there's a question on the homework, or a few of them that use similar information to answer the question. Now, one of these kind of tells you, I think it says if the trade deficit is equal to a certain amount next year, what will GDP be, or how much will it change by? And so it's really just a matter of knowing in the first case, what was my trade deficit, and then how do I use that information, right? So my trade deficit was 10,000. So if my trade deficit goes up to, say, 15,000, right, that would mean that my imports went up by 5,000 more than my exports in this new year. And so I could represent that in my example by adding 5,000 more to imports. So if my imports was 60,000, the trade deficit increased to 15,000. That was an increase of 5,000, right? Okay, so if the trade deficit goes up by 5,000, GDP has to go down by that amount, right? So if I plug in this new value of imports, everything else stays the same, I'll see GDP goes down by 5,000 because the trade deficit went up. Okay, so just a simple example here to use this information in a particular example, and hopefully that helps you out in figuring out some of the homework problems.